Every gospel is slightly different. It's unique, giving a unique perspective. And when you look at how the gospels portray the death of Christ on the cross, his sufferings, again, they're all unique to a lesser or greater extent. For instance, when you read the Gospel of Mark, there's a clear statement there where Christ says, the Son of Man has come not to be served, but to serve and to be a ransom for many. So he uses the word ransom. And here I'm talking particularly about Jesus himself talking about his death on the cross and he himself explaining it rather than somebody else interpreting it, like Paul, for instance. This is what happened on the cross. Here, Jesus himself is saying, I will die as a ransom. And obviously, I talk about this to a greater extent in the series Jesus on the cross at the center of the war between good and evil, specifically in the second presentation that speaks about liberation, which is another synonym for ransom in biblical terms. Now, when you look at John's Gospel, there is a unique, not just a statement, but there is a passage in John chapter 12, John chapter 12, verses 23 to 33. In this short passage, Christ tells a story, or maybe symbolic story, see how you read it, how you interpret it. It's a story telling about him dying on the cross, and through this act he will attract many to himself, and he will drive out Satan from this world. Okay, let me read John chapter 12, 23 to 33. Well, I'm reading verses 23, 24, 31, 32, and 33. But Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Most assuredly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. Then from verse 31, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Just see how John portrays the cross of Christ. Very different to the other Gospels. Where in the other Gospels, there's a lot of, even in John, there's emphasis on Christ being judged by the high priests, by Pilate and Pontius Pilate, and then, he was crucified. But Christ himself is saying, no, this is what is actually taking place. You may not be able to see it right now, but I'm telling you, this is what I'm doing on the cross. I'm pronouncing judgment on this world. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all to myself. This he said, signifying by what death he would die. Okay, so you'll find this image only in John's Gospel. Christ is portraying himself as the seed. Now, this is why I said perhaps you should understand it symbolically, but there is much more to it than just reading that this is a parable of the seed. Why do I say this? Well, John 12:24 speaks of the seed of wheat that needs to die. Now, again, if you read the Bible as a story and go to the very beginning of the Bible, the creation account, and the few early chapters in Genesis, Genesis 3:15 refers to the seed of the woman, that is Eve, that will come and crush the serpent's head. In other words, it will crush Satan's head. In other words, it will drive Satan out of his place. Genesis 12:7, a bit further in Genesis, introduction of Abraham in the story. Genesis 12:7 refers to Abraham's promised seed or offspring. Why do I say seed? I'll explain it in a moment. It's the same thing. It's the same word in Hebrew. promised seed of Abraham, which is Christ, which will be Christ, it really uses the same Hebrew word that is used in Genesis creation. And in Genesis Hebrew account, the Hebrew word for seed, zerah, it's used both for vegetation, it's used when describing the animal life, propagation of animal life, propagation of human life, and it is also used for the woman's offspring that was to crush serpent's head in Genesis 3:15, zerah. So this word seed means it's got wide meaning. It speaks of the seed of vegetable seeds, human seed, animal seed, um, seed. Seed is what carries life. God has delegated the power of life and propagation of life through seed. And even when you read about the food that God gave humans to eat in Genesis, it's all very much it's all plant-based, but there is focused on the seed, the whole kernel. There's all the good stuff that you need is in a whole seed that you can get. Just get a grain of wheat with its husk, with its what do you call it, with germ. It's got all this good stuff: vitamins, minerals, oils for your brain, fiber for your insides. It's got everything in it. Good stuff. God has delegated life, the power of life, to this seed. So this is what it's really loaded with meaning. This concept of seed, the word seed. But I shall not talk about food right now, even though that is an important thing to consider. Um, Christ. Obviously, the Gospels are written in Greek. All the manuscripts are in Greek. But Christ was you know, a Hebrew. He spoke Aramaic. He had a Hebrew mindset on his lips and in his mind. When he said the word seed, it was loaded with meaning because he didn't speak Greek. He spoke in Hebrew, which means the seed could mean vegetable seed, vegetation seed, animal seed, human seed, all kinds of seed. So when you read Christ's word in John chapter 12, where Jesus says that when this seed falls into the ground, it will die, and then it will draw many to himself. It will produce much fruit, and then much fruit, much more seed, many more kernels. Then you read a few verses later, he says this in a slightly different way. When I'm lifted up on the cross, I will draw many to myself. In other words, produce the seed of salvation, and I will drive Satan out of this world. So, in other words, he would crush the serpent's head. So after bringing together John 12:24, where Christ says, I am the seed that will die, and John 12:31, the same passage, just a few verses down. 12:31, Satan or serpent will be driven out of this world or crushed. So it seems that John chapter 12 is really based on Genesis 3:15, both indirectly and directly. The text Genesis 3:15 that speaks of the promised seed of the woman that will crush the serpent's head. So John chapter 12 verses 23 to 33, this passage where Christ explains himself the meaning of his death on the cross. This passage is not only alluding to, but is also explaining and interpreting Genesis 3:15. Christ himself is interpreting this prophecy. He says, I am the fulfillment of this prophecy, and this is happening right now. The crushing of the serpent's head by the seed of the woman. Yeah. The process is beginning right now. But there's a more story to come after that, but this is happening right now. So what else have we got here? Jesus said, when I am lifted up, I will draw all to myself. And of course, the prince of this world will be driven out in the same act simultaneously. How exactly is Christ drawing all to himself by being lifted up on the cross. There are various ways to interpret this, to consider, to look at different perspectives. But if you who are listening to this are being drawn to Christ crucified, to Christ on the cross, then you know that it is working. This drawing is drawing yourself to him. How exactly doesn't matter right now at this point. But if you're being drawn to Christ crucified, then what he says is coming true. What matters is that Christ himself is the seed. He is that which gives life. He is the life principle. He is that through which all life comes. And eventually, everything that grows out of this seed, as he says, many kernels will come out of this one seed, symbolically speaking, or slightly more literally speaking, further down in chapter 12, few verses further down, or everything that is drawn to him and he is lifted up, he will harvest. He will harvest for himself when the wheat of the earth is ready for harvest at the second coming of Christ.